Speaking with us here on Flow FM, the member for Barker is Tony Pasin, also the Shadow Assistant Minister for Transport and Infrastructure. How are you, Tony?
I'm well, thanks, Ricky.
We have had a really bad run on South Australian roads. Indeed, looking at your broader transport portfolio, even in Victoria, they've had almost as many deaths as there have been days in the year on the roads. It's shocking.
It is. So to the 31st of December, 1,208 Australians have lost their lives on our road network. That's an increase of 7.3%. The trajectory is in the wrong direction and the trends are not our friend. And it's about time that governments across this country, particularly here in Canberra, took road safety seriously.
And when it comes to those numbers, I know obviously driver behaviour is a factor, but is it an indicator that our roads are a bit dangerous as well?
It has to be, because the reality is that driver behaviour, I don't think, has changed year to year and is fairly static. What is changing is the nature and condition of our roads. And what isn't changing is we aren't making the step changes that we need to address road safety. I've been saying for a long time now, Ricky, we need investments like the duplications of major highways, which would immediately reduce the likelihood of serious injury and fatalities on those roads. Take the Sturt Highway, which I know is close to your heart, and mine as well, but the Dukes and Augusta highways in South Australia all need to be duplicated. And if we want to be serious about reducing the road toll, we talk about target zero, then we're not going to get there unless we see significant investments in the road network to make them safer.
And something we saw when the rail line went out in the western part of South Australia and Western Australia was cut off was a huge amount of freight on roads. We're seeing more B-triples on roads. Is there a need for those sort of not only duplications but even more overtaking lanes because drivers maybe are taking too many risks around trucks?
Well, there's a need for more overtaking lanes. There's a need for wider carriageways. There's need for us to duplicate carriageways. I was at a road safety conference this week in Canberra, and we heard a really powerful presentation from a truck driver who was involved in a serious incident, which subsequently was determined to be a suicide. But she was making the point, which really resonated with me: in what other workplace would you be required to travel at 100 kilometres an hour down a road with 68 tonnes behind you and expect another worker in a similarly heavy vehicle travelling at a similar speed to come at you in the other direction with less than a metre between you? I mean, these are the circumstances that present ourselves on the roads. We've allowed this situation to develop over time. We don't accept fatalities in air freight. We don't accept them in other things we do in life, and yet we just bake in almost an acceptance that people are going to die on our roads in significant numbers. And I think we've got to reset our mindset around this, and the government needs to. I'm disappointed to tell your listeners that a recent meeting of infrastructure ministers in Australia, road safety was not even on the agenda. It used to, speaking to former infrastructure ministers and Deputy Prime Ministers McCormack and Joyce, it used to be the number one item on the agenda when we had responsibility for that agenda. It needs to go back to being the number one issue.
Well, we noticed, Tony Pasin, during the pandemic, there was a national cabinet created to deal with preventing deaths from COVID-19, and yet now in 2023 we are seeing a horrendous number of deaths on our roads.
Well, that's right. And Ricky, for your listeners, 2/3 of those deaths are occurring on regional, remote or rural roads. And I'm not saying that 2/3 of them are rural, regional, remote drivers, but they're occurring in our communities, so that the first responders are people that are listening to this program, and the people dealing with the immediate aftermath are those of us that are living in rural, regional or remote Australia. I don't think it's too much to ask for us to address this issue systematically and carefully. I'm not suggesting that investments will lead to us achieving target zero, which is, by the way, no serious injury or fatalities on the Australian road network. That's the stated goal. I'm not suggesting we'll be able to get there overnight with modest investment, but what I'm saying, and what I think we can expect, is that we can expect the trend heading in our direction. But at the moment, it's running away from us. Like I said, a 7.3% increase nationally. In terms of rural accidents, over 57% over a 5-year average. I mean, time for us to have a reality check here and think again about road safety.
And when you look at how Australia's farmers have made a massive contribution to the national economy, they've smashed their targets. They've got to $90 billion in farm gate value. We're 7 years short of getting to 100 in 2030. It looks like there's a lot of revenue for government coming out of regional Australia. Would a duplication be the way to, help not only stop road deaths, but also ensure the safe movement of the grain freight?
Well, it's not just obviously revenue coming from farming in regional communities. There's also significant revenue coming from mining and resources, and they also need to utilise our road network. And so the answer is absolutely. And I can quite clearly identify for you right now the assets that need to be seriously upgraded in South Australia. It's the duplication of the roads I mentioned, the Augusta, Sturt and Dukes Highways, the duplication of the Swamport Bridge and the connection between the Dukes Highway and the Sturt Highway to take freight out of the Adelaide Hills and away from travelling along Portrush Road. But the problem there, Ricky, is this. We've seen a $5 billion blowout, that's $5,000 million blowout, on the Torrens to Darlington section of the North-South Road that must be completed. You can't build half a road. It's got to be completed. But the inability of the state Labor government to manage that cost blowout means that the projects I just listed, all of whom would make the South Australian road network safer, all of which would make the South Australian road network more efficient, the money that we could have used for those endeavours has been chewed up by Torrens to Darlington. And so we'll get there eventually. But not in the near term, in my view, unfortunately, where we could have had the North-South Corridor and that project, the largest ever infrastructure project in South Australia, been managed appropriately. But unfortunately, it's been allowed to blow out, which means, once again, that your listeners and people like me who live in the country pay the price for that failure.
Tony Pasin, the Shadow Assistant Minister for Transport and Infrastructure, thanks for joining us today from Canberra.
No problem, Ricky.
During that interview, Tony Pasin made a reference to suicide. If you are in distress and needing help, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is an SMS service, 0477 13 11 14, 0477 13 11 14, or you can contact Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36.